all started on a blazing summer afternoon when the lake shimmered like a sheet of glass and my dock, a modest wooden platform I had built with my own hands years ago, was the only quiet refuge from the chaos of the nearby neighborhood, a place where I could cast a line into the water, sip a cold beer, or just let the sun dip behind the tree line in peace. But that peace shattered the day Karen arrived, strutting down the gravel path like she owned every plank of timber nailed into that shoreline, clutching a clipboard in one hand, oversized sunglasses perched on her face, and the kind of smug grin that told you she'd already decided she was right before opening her mouth. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat about lake etiquette, but something deeper, something territorial, something soaked in the arrogance only an HOA board member could weaponize. She stopped at the edge of my dock, tapped her pen against the wood, and declared in a tone sharp enough to slice through the humid air that this dock, my dock, the dock I had sunk posts for in the mud, the dock I had stained and repaired year after year against storms and seasons, was technically common property under the HOA's jurisdiction. And, as such, she had the authority to restrict its use, meaning I could no longer tie up my fishing boat or entertain friends there without first seeking permission from her and her committee of clipboard warriors. And I swear to you, hearing her say that, watching her squint at me like I was some trespasser on my own land, ignited a fire in my chest that was equal parts rage and disbelief, because I knew the deed to my property. I knew the survey markers buried in the soil. I knew this dock wasn't just a decoration but an extension of the land I legally owned. Yet she spoke with the kind of bureaucratic confidence that makes you second-guess your own reality, and before I could even get a word in, she continued, rambling about community standards and exclusive rights for board members, as though this lakeside paradise was her personal kingdom, not a shared space where neighbors respected one another. And that's when she dropped the bomb. If I didn't remove my boat by the end of the week, she would begin eviction proceedings through the HOA, essentially fining me into submission until I had no choice but to surrender. Now, I don't know about you, but there's something uniquely infuriating about being told you're trespassing on your own land. And as I stood there with the sun baking down and the water gently lapping against the dock posts, I realized this wasn't just about a boat or a dock. This was about control, about Karen proving she could bend me to her will. And in that instant, a cold, dangerous clarity settled over me. If she wanted war, then war was exactly what she was going to get. Because no amount of HOA bluster was going to strip me of what was rightfully mine. I played it calm, though, biting my tongue as she strutted back up the path, her heels clicking against the gravel like gunfire, her little victory smirk plastered across her face. And as she disappeared behind the hedges, I knew my next move wasn't going to be just defensive. It was going to be strategic, methodical, and if I played it right, poetic, because Karen didn't just want to evict me from my dock, she wanted to erase me from the shoreline. And if she thought I'd roll over, she had no idea what kind of storm she'd just unleashed. The week that followed Karen's little declaration of war was like living under siege, because every single day she found a new way to needle at me, to remind me that in her mind she had already won. Whether it was leaving smugly typed violation notices tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck, or snapping photos of my dock with that oversized iPad she carried around like a badge of authority, or even worse, marching other board members down the path to my shoreline, as though leading some twisted HOA field trip where she'd point and gesture and whisper about non-compliance, all while I stood on my porch watching like a prisoner on his own land, seething but silent. And the more she paraded around, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just about rules. It was about power, her need to dominate every inch of this neighborhood, until even the lake itself bent to her whims. But here's the thing about Karen. She underestimated me. She thought I'd break under the pressure, cave in like so many of my other neighbors who had quietly surrendered their gardens, their decorations, their freedom piece by piece, until the HOA dictated everything from the height of their fences to the color of their front doors. And maybe she thought I was just another pushover, another box to check off her list. But every notice she left, every photograph she snapped, every smug look she tossed over her shoulder was fuel for me. Gasoline poured over the fire in my chest. Because I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to expose her. The breaking point came late one evening when I found her standing on my dock, clipboard in hand, phone in the other, recording some kind of evidence video for her files. And the sight of her standing there, on the boards I had built with my own sweat, the boards sunk into the waterline of my deeded property, was too much, and I marched down with a calmness I didn't feel, my voice steady but sharp as a blade, as I told her point blank that if she didn't leave immediately, I'd be calling the sheriff. And that's when her mask slipped. That's when the smug smile faltered and the venom poured out, because she spun around and spat words that still echo in my head. This dock doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the association. You're nothing but a guest here, and soon enough you won't even be that. Now, I'm not a man who scares easy, but I'll admit, hearing those words chilled me, not because I believed them, but because I realized just how far she was willing to go, just how deep her claws had sunk into the HOA machine. And as she stormed past me, muttering about lawyers and injunctions, I knew my next move wasn't going to be made on the dock, or even in the neighborhood. It was going to be made in the county records office, in the stacks of dusty deeds and property surveys that held the truth Karen desperately wanted to bury. And sure enough, after a few hours of digging, after cross-referencing lot numbers and shoreline markers, I uncovered what I had suspected all along. The dock wasn't just on my land, it was exclusively mine, an extension clearly marked in black and white on the original survey filed decades ago, long before Karen ever wormed her way onto the HOA board. And that discovery hit me like a lightning strike, because not only was I right, not only was her entire campaign a fraud, but I suddenly held a weapon far sharper than any angry retort or legal fine. I held the truth, and with it, the power to turn the tables. But instead of rushing to confront her, I decided to let her dig her own grave a little deeper, to let her stew in her arrogance while I gathered everything I needed, snapping photos, making copies, even recording the way she trespassed onto my property with her little posse of clipboard commandos, because when the time came to strike, I wanted there to be no escape, no wiggle room, no plausible deniability. And as I watched her continue her crusade, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon, I realized something dark but undeniable. I wasn't just planning to defend my dock anymore. I was planning to make her feel exactly what she had tried to make me feel: helpless, powerless, stripped of control. And though I didn't know it yet, the perfect opportunity for that revenge was already floating just a few feet away, tied neatly to my dock in the form of Karen's shiny new pontoon boat, her pride and joy, the crown jewel she bragged about at every HOA meeting, and the very thing that would soon become the centerpiece of my payback. The night I decided to take Karen's boat wasn't planned in some Hollywood movie kind of way. There were no blueprints or secret heist teams. It was just me, a man pushed too far, standing on my porch with the moonlight shimmering over the lake, the sound of crickets filling the humid air, and the sight of that pontoon boat bobbing gently against the dock like a taunt I couldn't ignore any longer, because for weeks Karen had treated me like an intruder, like a trespasser on my own land. But here she was, using my dock every single day as if it were her personal marina, tying up her oversized toy on the boards I built, claiming authority over something she didn't even have the right to touch, and the hypocrisy of it burned hotter than anything else. So I grabbed my jacket, walked quietly down the gravel path, and stepped onto the dock with a steadiness that surprised me, every creak of the boards beneath my boots echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. And there it was, Karen's boat, polished and pristine, the HOA's crown jewel, sitting smugly in the moonlight like it belonged to her, like everything else she claimed to control. And I knew in that moment that taking it wasn't just an act of revenge. It was justice, the kind of justice the courts would never hand me, the kind that came from showing her, in no uncertain terms, that she had no power here. I untied the rope slowly, carefully, listening to the soft splash of the water as the line slid free from the cleat, my eyes darting back toward her darkened house up the hill, half expecting to see a curtain twitch. But nothing moved, nothing stirred, and soon the boat was free, drifting slightly away from the dock, waiting for me like some silent accomplice. I stepped aboard, the deck rocking gently under my weight, the smell of lake water and vinyl mixing in the air. And as I lowered myself into the captain's chair and wrapped my hands around the wheel, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control, pure and undeniable control, and with one twist of the key, the engine hummed to life, low and steady, a heartbeat beneath my own, and I eased the throttle forward, guiding her prized possession out into the open water. The lake stretched out in front of me like a mirror, the moon painting a silver path across the rippling surface, and for the first time in this entire battle I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh, because here I was, the man she tried to evict, piloting her boat across my shoreline, proving in the most literal way possible that her threats meant nothing, her rules meant nothing, her entire empire of clipboards and fines meant nothing, because at the end of the day, she couldn't stop me. I didn't steal it to keep it, no, that wasn't the point. I wasn't some criminal. The point was to take her weapon, the very thing she flaunted as her pride, and remind her that she was vulnerable, that she wasn't untouchable, that she couldn't bully me into submission without consequences. And as I cut the engine in the middle of the lake and let the boat drift under the stars, I imagined the look on her face come morning, when she'd march down to my dock with another violation slip in hand, only to find nothing there. Her precious pontoon vanished into the night, and the thought filled me with a satisfaction no fine, no court case, no sheriff's report could ever deliver. I sat there for what felt like hours, letting the gentle waves rock me, savoring the silence, savoring the reversal of power. Because for the first time in this entire war, she was the one out of control. She was the one who'd be scrambling, and I, for once, could breathe easy. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end, because Karen wasn't the type to accept humiliation quietly. And though I returned the boat later under cover of darkness, tying it off to a public dock a mile down the shoreline, the damage was already done, the message already sent. And when the sun rose the next morning, and her shrill voice carried across the water as she discovered her missing toy, I stood on my porch with a coffee in hand, watching her panic, watching her call the sheriff, watching her wave her arms and pace like a cornered animal, and I knew that whatever storm was coming next, I was ready for it. Because once you've taken away a bully's pride, once you've stripped them of the illusion of power, they can never look at you the same way again, and that, right there, was my victory. The fallout from that night was louder, messier, and more entertaining than I ever could have dreamed, because by the time Karen realized her precious pontoon had mysteriously reappeared at a public dock down the shoreline, word had already spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, neighbors whispering, chuckling, some even walking past my property just to sneak a look at the infamous dock where it had all gone down. And for once, the conversations weren't about me being some supposed rule breaker, but about Karen, about how she had strutted for weeks declaring my dock was hers, about how she'd called the sheriff in hysterics claiming her boat was stolen, only for law enforcement to discover it perfectly safe, tied up at a county dock, with no signs of theft or damage, just a neat little mystery that made her look like a fool. And oh, how she hated it. How the color drained from her face when the deputies gently reminded her that if she was accusing me of wrongdoing, she'd need actual proof, not just her word. Because as far as the law was concerned, I hadn't trespassed. I hadn't vandalized. I hadn't done anything illegal. And the best part was watching the realization hit her that this whole ordeal had cracked her porcelain mask of authority wide open. Because suddenly the neighbors she once bullied into silence weren't quite so afraid anymore. Suddenly, they saw her as fallible, ridiculous even. And it only took a few brave voices, Mrs. Green from the cul-de-sac, the Petersons from across the lake, to start questioning her, to start pointing out the absurdity of the fines, the overreach of her policies. And just like that, the once untouchable queen of the HOA began to crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. But of course, Karen wasn't one to go down quietly. And for weeks, she doubled down, filing complaints, demanding emergency HOA meetings, even trying to launch some half-baked dock ownership review committee that fell apart the moment I stood up, calm and confident, and laid out the original survey and deed in front of the board, documents so clear, so irrefutable, that even her closest allies on the board couldn't deny the truth. The dock was mine, the shoreline was mine, and her entire crusade had been nothing more than an ego trip built on lies. The silence in that room, as I finished speaking, was thick enough to cut with a knife. And though Karen tried to sputter, tried to spin some excuse about interpretation and community benefit, Everyone knew she was finished. And when the board voted to dismiss her complaints once and for all, she stormed out of the clubhouse red-faced and trembling, muttering about lawsuits that never came. After that, things shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Neighbors I barely knew came by to shake my hand, to thank me for standing up when they couldn't, for proving that someone could actually fight back and win, and in their eyes I wasn't just the guy with the dock anymore. I was the one who had broken Karen's chokehold on the community, the one who had shown that the HOA's power wasn't absolute, and let me tell you, that felt better than any revenge I could have plotted. But the sweetest moment came a few weeks later, on another still summer morning, when I sipped my coffee from the porch and watched as a for sale sign was hammered into Karen's yard. Her empire finally reduced to boxes and moving trucks. Her reign of petty tyranny washed away like ripples on the lake. And though part of me wished I could have seen the look on her face as she drove away for the last time, another part of me was content just knowing I had outlasted her, that I had protected what was mine, without bending, without breaking, without surrendering an inch. And now, every time I step onto my dock, every time I hear the water lapping against the posts, or watch the sun set over the waterline she once tried to claim, I feel that quiet satisfaction all over again, the satisfaction of a battle fought, a bully beaten, and a man who refused to be evicted from his own land. Because in the end, Karen didn't just lose her boat for a night, she lost her grip on the entire neighborhood, and all it took was me reminding her, in the most unforgettable way possible, that no matter how many fines, threats, or rules she threw my way, she never really owned anything here at all.